data. This is a slide showing runaway youth for the past, about 15 months from last April. And this is broken out by length of time they've been on runaway status. So if you will look at the bar on the far right, which would be our current data, the most current data we have for August, you'll see that 42 of those kids have been on runaway for less than a month. The majority have been on runaway from 1 month up to 6 months. About 42 have been on runaway status for 7 to 12 months. And then the remainder, we've got 16 that have been between 1 and 2 years. And then the remainder, which is a very small number, have been on runaway status more than 2 years. We had been seeing a pretty steady decrease leading up until October of 19, and then we saw an uptick in the number of kids on runaway status since that time. And currently, our latest monthly report shows for kids 0 to 17, there are 233 youth on runaway status as late as June 30th. The next slide. These are children who are considered missing. These are children who have not run away but are missing. I'm putting together a little chart that shows how many kids have been missing status since last July. So for the past fiscal year, we've seen a steady decline in the number of children who show as missing children. Obviously, these children are of great concern to the department. We would like to find them and have them return to care or return to care. Some of them never they may go missing during the investigation process when a parent leaves or disappears before we are able to pick up the child, which the children may be in our legal custody, but we don't have them in our physical custody. So in an effort to try to improve the work we're doing with these kids, there have been some significant quality improvement efforts made by the department. Just a very high-level overview, they have initiated monthly case reviews. They have dedicated efforts to locate these youth by utilizing a variety of resources, which I'll talk about later, and then providing additional locate resources for staff who have children who are on runaway status. The monthly case reviews, every week we provide updated data, and the program specialists who are a unique role. Most offices in, say, Maricopa, Pima, Pinal, possibly Yuma. Most offices that are larger offices have a designated program specialist. This person has a lot of different special projects. They may help with case reviews. They may help with data. They may do a variety of things to help provide some support to the program manager for that office. Some areas in rural areas may utilize one program specialist for multiple offices. So generally speaking, and again, it's very general, these offices are looking at each month anywhere from 10 to 20 kids that they're reviewing who are on runaway status or are considered missing. So what are they doing with these kids in their office when they're reviewing these cases? So the first thing they're looking to do are some of the key points in our policy that are required. Are those things happening in the case? So they're checking to see, first of all, the first thing they do is check to see, is the data that's in child accurate? First question usually is that child actually still on runaway status? Sometimes it just may be that the data has not been updated and needs to be done so. Then they're looking to see whether there are motion for pickups. Has the DCS specialist filed a motion for pickup? Have we filed a police report? Have we notified law enforcement that the child's on runaway status? Have we tried to make family contact? Have we notified the family that the youth is on runaway? Determined maybe the child has run back to mom's house or to a relative that they have a connection with. We're checking to see whether the specialist has made contact with the previous provider. Maybe the child has reached out to the previous foster parent or staff at a previous group home. And so it's going back to that previous provider to see if there's any information they may have to help assist us with locating the child. Have we notified the parents that the child is on runaway status? We can submit a school locate referral, reach out to their school and see if there's any assistance the school can provide or any information the school can provide to help us locate the youth. Then it's making a referral to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's required for all kids who are on runaway status or who are missing. And then we have what's called at-risk referrals, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in detail. So as the program specialists are reviewing these cases, they're working with the specialist and the specialist supervisor to provide a little support and guidance on the things that have or have not been accomplished, working with those specialists to get some of those tasks accomplished and seeing what supports the specialist needs to help bolster those activities. In addition, we have a dedicated staff member who is taking additional action to support the specialist to locate these children. So not just a specialist and their supervisor, but a staff person who is kind of making extra efforts. They're reaching out and contacting relatives. Maybe there's an aunt or an uncle. Maybe there's a significant person in that child's life who they had a previous history with, who the child may have reached out to or attempted to contact.
Redundant.
Utilizing advanced search engines that we have available to us, for example, LexisNexis, and utilizing some of these tools, a little bit more advanced tools than just simple Google, to help see if there's any information in social media or other venues where we might be able to get some information to help us. Contacting known supports of the youth. So is there maybe a former soccer coach or a former teacher or church member or somebody in the neighborhood who the child might have a special connection with, who may have had contact with the child, or who may know something about the child that would help us in our search. And then they provide the specialist and the supervisor with this expanded list of additional relatives and support, so that specialist has that moving forward. And then this person will also either visit some of these relatives, visit these known support. They may send them a certified letter, or try to reach out and contact them directly, speak to them and see if there's any information that they've got. And I talked a little bit about these program specialists in each office now have access to LexisNexis to help. This is a much more advanced search engine that can look at a variety of databases that most of us would not have access to. We created an inbox with our Office of Child Welfare Investigations for what we're calling at-risk referrals. So there are youth who may be a worker may decide that they're at higher risk while on runaway status. And OCWI can also utilize some of the resources they have with law enforcement and some of the skills that they have in their unique capacity to provide additional and more intensive efforts to locate the youth. We've also got a family locate unit, which we utilize for a variety of purposes, but they can also provide some extra support, doing more intensive searches to take a little weight off the specialist's shoulders and to provide some additional support to get more information that might be possible. And obviously, we would be looking to see if there's any information on National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in that website. So the at-risk referrals. So if a worker believes there is no standard that, in no boxes that have to be checked to say what makes a youth an at-risk youth to send a referral to OCWI to get assistance. OCWI will not deny a referral that's made. But typically, these kiddos may have been on an extended runaway episode. Maybe they've been on runaway for more than a year. They may have serious behavioral health history, a history of suicidal or homicidal ideation. Maybe their substance abuse history is quite chronic and quite extensive. And they may have risky sexual behaviors or history that would put them at additional risk if on runaway status. So these kids can be referred to OCWI, and they have staff who will assist the specialist in utilizing some of the tools they have available to them. And so when the program specialist is reviewing the cases, they're asking a series of questions. So they're reviewing the data. One, is the child a crossover youth? Are they duly involved? That's usually a good place to start. Make sure we're talking to probation officers and others involved in other systems the child was involved with. Have we verified that the data is actually accurate? Like I said earlier, we want to make sure the child is actually still on runaway status and the worker has updated that information. If a youth has returned and the worker has not inundated that runaway in the system, then it might still be showing up as a data element. In addition, separate and apart from what the specialists are doing, each time we issue the semi-annual report, we do some intensive data cleanup, really a manual data cleanup, where our data folks are sending me a list of all the kids who are on runaway status and those children who have exited by reason of runaway. And then we're going in and actually looking in that case to, first of all, we want to look at any kids who are under the age of 12, particularly if they're showing as a runaway, to make sure that the worker has entered that information accurately. We also want to make sure that the kids who are exiting by reason of runaway, sometimes the system right now, the child system allows for the potential for some error if you select reunification as an exit reason, or if the child's on runaway when they reach the age of majority, they may be selecting the wrong exit reason. And we do a review of the case to make sure that the correct exit reason was selected. We're looking at the data, making sure that a motion for pickup has been filed, that the police report has been made, and that monthly locate efforts by the specialist are being documented in the child's database system. Making sure that we have notified the parents that the child is on runaway status, and letting them know what action is required of them and what they can do to support having that kid return to custody. Was a school locate referral completed, and have we reported that child to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children? And again, making sure that not only specialists are aware of the at-risk referral that can be made to OCWI, but making sure they have at least made that determination to submit that referral. And if one has been submitted, what's the status, and do we need to resubmit it or provide them some more information to assist them? And that is pretty much all of my presentation. Obviously, open to any questions you guys may have.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that informative presentation. But in terms of metrics, I'll ask the first question. What is the best metric to look at when you're going to be thinking about improvement and success rate? How do you all think about following the data and knowing when trends are moving in the right direction or the wrong direction?
Well, I think one of the first is making sure that the data is accurate within the system. And what we're doing with the semi-annual, as well as what they're doing at the front end of these case reviews, is probably the one of the most important pieces. When we really started tackling this problem about 2 years ago, we were noticing children who were 2 years old and being called runaway. And we questioned, is a 2-year-old really run away from home in terms of the way we normally think of a child who's a runaway? And the system allows you to make one of two choices. You can select runaway or missing child. It's what we call a manual placement. And the system also does not force a worker to end date that manual placement episode. So if the child does return and they create a placement with a licensed foster parent, for example, the system doesn't force them to end date that runaway. And so we want to make sure that that runaway episode was end dated, because it will still populate when we're doing aggregate data counts. So there was just a lot of data cleanup that we have focused on that I think has been critical. And then I think as we continue these case review process, to make sure that the critical pieces of what they're trying to measure with this monthly case reviews is the next page. Are we has the youth been reported to NCMEC? Have we filed a motion for pickup? Has a police report been made? I mean, those are critical pieces to making sure those things have been done, as well as, and I don't know how you put this in data, but definitely it's utilizing those locate referrals and our folks continually making effort at utilizing the locate tools that we have available to us, that's being done on a regular basis.
Do you have the ability to track the average length of being on runaway status or missing status?
We do. And this slide that I'm showing now, I guess I just realized I'm showing you my whole screen, not just. Can you still see my screen?
No, Mark, it went away.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
I can still see it.
Okay. So, excuse me. So on this chart, this shows the number of children on runaway combined, and then it breaks it out by the length of time they've been on runaway status. The majority of which really fall in that 1 to 6 month time frame. Now we can't automatically say, so for example, if you look at July and August, we can't say if these 3 kids that had been on runaway for a month, did they roll over into the next category of 137 on 3 to 6 months? Some of those kids may return, some kids may return and then they run away again. So, but we can generally show how long kids have been on runaway status by this, using these date ranges.
Do you have a set group of criteria for when a child is no longer on runaway status or no longer on missing status, for what the outcome is, whether it's return to department custody or perhaps return to family or something like that? What are the categories that this fall into?
So if they're return, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. Category for when they return from runaway status?
Yes, they're no longer appropriately classified as missing or runaway. What are the possible categories for them?
Well, it would depend on where they're placed. Because this is considered it's not really a placement, but when we're wanting to say where is the child located, what is the out-of-home care provider, that would, if they go to a group home, they would fall in the group home count. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, I think so. So they basically would just receive the same kind of placement. At that point, they're located, they're still within the custody of the department. They have the same kind of placement codes or placement categories that the child in the custody of the department.
Right. Once they're located, the trigger would be that obviously when either the specialist locates them, they will have to submit a service authorization for their new placement, which would trigger removing them from the runaway category and having them in, say, a licensed foster home or a group home, whatever that may be. And that's if it's, say, for example, law enforcement picks them up and maybe law enforcement calls the hotline. Obviously, it's still that contact between law enforcement and the agency that notifies the worker that the child needs to be picked up in the placement, and the placement process begins.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Members, any other questions for Mark?
Peter, this is Sergeant Laws. I've got a couple of things.
Please
Sure.
go ahead. Thanks.
So for law enforcement, and I can speak for Mesa Police specifically and in general for law enforcement, but for these kids that run away, we have to remember that these are kids that are voluntarily running away on their own, and that they're actively trying to evade being found and being located, which is typical for anybody who runs away. It's not just for DCS kids, but that's just who we're dealing with first off. The first issue that law enforcement runs into that is a frustration for us is when we show up at a group home or even a foster home, the training for those that are in charge basically is if the child that walks away leaves or even threatens to leave, that they cannot physically stop that from occurring. In fact, they'll call us and say they're walking away, I can still see them, but I'm not stopping them. And so our frustration is, especially when we have multiple runaways, the same repeats over and over again, is we know that they're runaways, we know they're going to run away, but it is difficult for law enforcement because there is no upfront measures put in place to stop the child from running away again. Is there something that you guys are doing to address that?
So that starts to fall out of my wheelhouse, so to speak. I know that a group home staff, for example, they can't tackle the child. They can't forcibly block the door, block them in the house, but they can call crisis response if that seems to be the issue. Sometimes it may be the child and the group home staff are having a conflict, or maybe another child is having a conflict, or they're really struggling with the transition into foster care. So the group homes and placements and grandparents and foster parents, when the child is placed, they're given information for the crisis response unit and the behavioral health team and who their members of their child and family team may be, so they can have a crisis plan in place to help de-escalate that situation, so they don't completely leave and run away. But obviously there's where staff and placements cannot physically bar that child from being in the from leaving the house. They can't tackle them, or they can obviously lock doors as needed as they would throughout the normal course of just securing safety for all the children in the home, but they can't do anything to restrain that child unless they're a danger to themselves, and I think there's even limitations on how that would be.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, and I understand what you're saying. I'm making sure that the committee is aware that when we're talking about how the child goes missing, very few children go to their case manager or the group home worker and say, I'm going to run away. Most of them just run away without any knowledge, or they'll say they're going to their room. I mean, like any other child that is upset, they don't typically say, I'm going to do this. They just do it, and then we find out they're missing after the fact. That's one piece of the frustration. Law enforcement does most of the things that you've enumerated as far as how to find a child after they're gone. But second to that is when law enforcement gets notified about a child that's gone missing, we have a certain protocol that we do initially in that very first few minutes to try to do what we can to saturate the area to try to find the child. A frustration, again, that law enforcement has is that there's directive from DCS that we are not allowed to put out media releases or even bulletins to the community to let them know, which is standard practice for us. If any child goes missing, we'll saturate the area with social media, with bulletins that we'll put in convenience stores or things like that, so that we can have the community be our eyes and ears looking for that child. We're banned from doing that when it comes to DCS kids. Is there any thought on that?
Yeah. And I would have to defer to somebody else on the whys and the wherefores of why we can't do that. I'm assuming that confidentiality plays into that a large piece. I know one of the key pieces is for kids who have multiple runaway episodes. Obviously, if it's a child's first episode, that's a much different situation. But one of the things that's just a continuous effort is if children are running away, if a youth is run away, then the child and family team really should be looking at what's driving that behavior, what needs to be put in place to help prevent a future a future runaway episode. Is it that the child just has a substance use problem and they're, leaving because they want to go party with their friends that weekend, versus is this a child who's running away to stay away forever and trying to go somewhere where he can hide and avoid authority. So that child and family team really should be looking closely when a child returns from a runaway episode. Is the placement equipped to handle these episodes, to kind of maybe see, are there any red flags or triggers that we can identify that might tell us that the kid's bordering on a runaway episode. So that's definitely an ongoing challenge and ongoing need for just continual conversation.
Right. And one last point I wanted to make is this is personal experience. So myself, I am over our special victims unit, which typically is sex crimes, but we also take care of all of our missing kids that initially get called in. And so I get these calls all the time. And I can tell you that me specifically, we get phone calls from the same group home for the same kids over and over again, multiple times throughout the same week. They go missing for a day, 2, whatever, they find them, and then they just go missing again. And so a lot of this is just repeat. And we have conversations with the group home saying, what can we do to fix this? And we get put into the workaround of talk to the case manager, and we just get in the run around of how we're trying to help that happen so that we can get the kids in a better place where they wouldn't be causing us to have putting those resources in for them over and over again. And this is probably not up in your alley necessarily, but I'm just making sure the committee is aware that there are a lot of other factors that are in the front end of the staff that you're putting up here.
Well, and I would say along those lines, when I talked to the director about presenting, he did want me to make sure that everybody understood we would invite and welcome any recommendations or suggestions you have. One of the things we started to do, and the data's a little wonky, so we're still trying to see how we actually do that with the data we have available to us, which was to look at, are we seeing group homes who are having kids with a lot more runaway episodes than others, and what that might look like, because we might expect certain types of group homes to have a higher incidence of runaway because of the nature of the behaviors of the kids that they take if they have they're a structured or unique group home. But we're definitely trying to find ways where we can look at that particular issue that's a little more data driven. And then if we are able to look at which homes, and the next step is obviously what's driving those numbers. And I think that's where we'll really need some support from the community. What suggestions are out there and what recommendations you guys might have, how would you address those issues? How would you really kind of tackle working with those group homes that have those high incidents of runaway episodes? And how are they responding when the kids come back? If they let the kid back.
I can tell you from our experience that the group home people we directly deal with are frustrated because they feel like when they call case managers for the kids, they're basically told they're going to come back and it's going to happen again, but it is what it is. They're not getting the support of, we're going to find a different location, we're going to split kids up. We have, for instance, recently we've had a group of kids that have run away together multiple times, and they have not separated them. They keep sending them back to the same group home, and the three of them together are, they're going to keep doing it, and they say they're going to keep doing it. So our frustration is that we have a need for them to be separated, because that would limit their going out like that, and we feel like we're not getting that response.
Do you see similar things with foster homes, or is that not really something you guys notice?
Yeah, foster homes have the same thing. They'll call us and say that the child's run away. Probably not to the same degree, because they have less rotation in a foster home than a group home. But they will call and say, we got this placement ran away. We've called the case manager, and the case manager said when they return, they're just going to stay here. Even if it's repeat, they get told they're going to have to deal with it. And that was my experience as a foster parent myself. For the years that I was a foster parent, we had the same experience.
And is there anybody within the department other than the specialists that folks are talking to or communicating with? Is there any conversation with placement or placement administration?
Well, we have had my investigators call the case managers for these kids, and then try to go up to their chain to bosses and things like that. Very rarely do we get a response of, we're going to make a change. Mostly we get told, this is where they're placed, they're going to stay there unless they become a danger to themselves or others.
Okay. And I kind of was curious when you had talked about you're not able to utilize some of the same resources, social media, different things. Are there specific things that you guys would use if you could? I mean, I'm just trying to identify what you guys use. Is there any conversation that can be happen that would allow us to use you guys to be able to use those resources? I mean, obviously, I think there's some things that are just, we can't allow confidential information out to the general public, but are there some things that, may be more restricted is there any wiggle room, I guess, is what I'm curious about.
And I don't see that wiggle room. And when you're looking for a specific child and you're giving their name, their date of birth, what they look like, what they were last wearing, you can't edit that out of a bulletin. So that's how we would normally look for a child. We can't just put a blind bulletin out saying, look for a 12-year-old, So I understand that there is a reason for the concern for the confidentiality, but if they're a missing child, they're a missing child. If they're a runaway, we would react the same no matter what. We're going to try to find the child, but our hands are tied because we don't have access to reaching out to the community like we normally would in other circumstances.
Okay.